I wanted to take the opportunity to address the matters that have been raised in recent days, particularly those arising from the book that has been published, plagued in recent days, and of course to take any questions you may wish to raise in relation to these issues. And I start by referring to the statement that I issued yesterday, and I'm sure you've had the opportunity to read that, and if you have questions on that, I'm happy to address. But let me just add a couple of things first, and then we can go from there. These were extraordinary times in which I had the great honour and privilege to serve as Prime Minister. No Prime Minister, I think, has faced the same combination of circumstances, be it the pandemic or indeed the drought, the global recession, and indeed the Australian recession that was caused by the pandemic and the many other natural disasters that befell the country over that period of time. It was a very difficult time. It was a very unusual time. It was a very extraordinary time that tested every sinew and fabric of governments, not just at a federal level, but at a state level as well, and indeed tested the very fabric and sinew of Australian society. The good news is that Australia emerged well, that Australia emerged strongly, that Australia's economy, Australia's health performance, Australia's, I believe, democracy and the way we went about things emerged, frankly, as an example to every other developed country around the world. The facts of that, I think, are not in dispute. 40,000 lives saved, tens of thousands of businesses that would not be here today. One of the most common things people come and say to me after the election is people from small business. It happens everywhere I go. And they say, thank you, that my business is still there today and that my employees still have a job and that now there are better times and they are doing better. Sure, it's tough still, but they know what the alternative could have been. So I'm very proud of what Australia was able to achieve over that period. I'm very proud of Australians, and I'm proud of all of those who did everything they possibly could, whether they be health workers on the front line or those public officials who beavered away in the back offices supporting governments at a state and federal level to help us all make the best decisions we possibly could at a time of extreme strain and unprecedented levels of challenge that you have not seen in this country since wartime. Over that period, we took decisions. I did as a Prime Minister, we did as cabinets at federal and state level that some of us would never have dreamed that we would ever have to make. And I remember making that comment on numerous occasions. The situation was very real. It was very serious. Events changed hourly, if not even more frequently than that. Meetings were constant. There was a procession of these and engagements. As you know, the National Cabinet met 57 times under my direction. And that highlights that this pandemic and this crisis, it wasn't a 2-month thing. It went over more than 2 years, all the way indeed up till the time of the election, and in its own form today continues. And there are challenges still even now. The prospect of serious loss of life, of disruption to civil society, of the collapse of our economy, as we were seeing in other parts of the world, was real. As we sit here now in the relative calm seas, or perhaps from the safety of the shore, and we look back at a time which was a raging tempest, people can be led to make judgments out of context. But the context was very real. I was very mindful of it, as were all of my colleagues, and I'm sure at a state level as well, who I sought to work with constructively the whole time. The situation was highly uncertain, as I've said, and dynamic. And I'd make this point. There was a clear expectation established in the public's mind, certainly in the media's mind, and absolutely certainly in the mind of the opposition, as I would walk into question time every day, that I, as Prime Minister, was responsible pretty much for every single thing that was going on. Every drop of rain, every strain of the virus, everything that occurred over that period of time. Now, I'm not taking issue with that, but this was the expectation, and I think the Australian public had an expectation that the Prime Minister had the authority to even overrule states. Now, that was not the case. But where there were authorities or powers that could be established, there was a clear expectation that I, as Prime Minister, would have sought to put those in place to protect the country and lead us through what was a very difficult period. People held me rightly to account for that. We've had an election, and that's been run and done, and here I am before you today no longer as the Prime Minister. That is our great democracy, which I cherish. Having said that, at that time, people expected me to be able to take what responsibilities I could to deal with the issues I was dealing with every day, and I did so. I did so. There were gaps. Our system, I think, was put under the microscope and put under strain. And I hope that the experience of this time will assist those in the future to better understand how these issues can be managed. And I'm happy to cooperate with any positive purpose or any positive process that is really about understanding that. Because I know better than anybody the types of issues we had to deal with on a constant basis. And there are gaps in how our systems work, and we sought to overcome them. The very creation of the National Cabinet was an example of that, recognising that the Commonwealth had no power over the states. But equally, we found a mechanism as best we could to have it work together. There are critics of that, but it continues to operate today as an example of what I hope is a durable institution that will facilitate cooperative relations between the states and the federal government. So, in that context, with an understanding of the expectation of public responsibility singularly directed at the Prime Minister, I believed it was necessary to have authority to have what were effectively emergency powers to exercise in extreme situations that would be unforeseen, that would enable me to act in the national interest. And that is what I did in a crisis. Because frankly, I'd rather be having this conversation about what I did do to try and protect the Australian people. And if there are views that overstepped the mark, happy to have that conversation. Because what was focusing my mind was not having the conversation that perhaps I could have put powers in place if situations had arisen that I hadn't been in a position to address because I hadn't done the things that have been set out in recent days. So I'd rather have this discussion about what I did do rather than what I didn't do in order to ensure that I was exercising those responsibilities. So, together with my colleagues, we did save lives, we did save livelihoods, and we did so in a way that, as I've moved around the world since the election, is recognised. And there will come a time here, I suppose, it will be maybe recognised also, but that is not my purpose today. A couple of other points. I want to stress with the 5 departments in which I was sworn to administratively by the Governor-General, at no time, except in the one instance that I've made reference to in relation to resources in the Department of Industry, did I interfere in any of the decisions or exercise those powers in those departments. Secondly, I did not act as minister. There were not 2 ministers doing the same job, me as Prime Minister or the Minister. You may not be aware, and I think these events have highlighted perhaps some unawareness of these types of arrangements. For example, Ben Morton was the Minister assisting the Prime Minister and Cabinet. He was also the Minister for Public Service. That did not make him the Prime Minister, despite the fact he was sworn to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. It didn't make Ken Wyatt the Prime Minister. It didn't make Michael Sukkar, who was the Assistant Treasurer, the Treasurer. It didn't make Jason Wood, who was sworn to the Department of Home Affairs, the Minister for Home Affairs. These matters, as to what ministers do, are set out in charter letters which instruct the department and the minister on the matters that they are responsible for exercising on a daily basis. In taking on these authorities from the Governor-General, I did not instruct any department that I was to have jurisdiction or carriage of any of the issues that the ministers were dealing with on a day-to-day basis. They continued to exercise their powers as ministers fully and wholly, except in the one instance in relation to the decision that I referred to in my statement. I did not exercise those powers, and I had the power, though, to act if that was necessary, The powers that I was exercising and being sworn in administratively to those roles were lawful, based on the advice and working through those issues, as was done by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Office of the Governor-General, my own office. Those are obvious issues that were being addressed at the time, and we understood to be acting completely lawfully. But the point here is that at no time, because the accusation has been made that somehow this was seeking these additional powers for what purpose personally, I cannot understand. I didn't exercise them because thankfully the extreme circumstances in which I had established these powers to act in, thankfully, did not arise. The fact that ministers were unaware of these things is actually proof of my lack of interference or intervention in any of their activities, and that I honoured the basis upon which I sought those powers because I was only ever going to use them in an emergency situation that would require that. Now, I understand the offence that some of my colleagues particularly have felt about this. I understand that, and I've apologised to them. But equally, as Prime Minister, only I could really understand the weight of responsibility that was on my shoulders and on no one else. And as a result, I took the decisions that I thought I needed to take. I took the calls that I thought were necessary, and over the course of my time as Prime Minister, I sought to pursue the national interest on that basis, not for any personal advancement, but to get Australia through one of the worst crises we have faced since the Second World War. And the good news is, Australia, we got through it because of you, because of the actions that we all took in the areas we had responsibility. And that is a story I think Australians should be very, very proud of. Now, I make one other request while I'm here before I go to questions. One of the reasons I've come here today, I set this all out in a statement yesterday, but I'm happy to take the questions today because I would ask this of the media. As a Member of Parliament, of course I'm accountable and I'm happy to be here today. But members of my family have nothing to do with this. I would very much like that the cameras that sit outside my house each day and film my wife and my daughters going to school or going for a coffee, or if they would like to have friends around or tradespeople coming, they have nothing to do with this. And so out of respect, by all means sit outside my electoral office. There's great coffee down in the Cronulla. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But I would ask that you not invade the privacy of my family. I don't think that's an unreasonable request.